Test.
So he's going to do like a question and answer.
Yeah.
I started the stream already, so we just have to switch to it.
Yeah. But I have to finish that. I have
This one. Oh, just this one here. This one and then that one. Stop
Okay,
streaming,
okay.
stop recording.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you, Caleb.
Oh, thank you. Did you didn't know the husbands or did you? You did.
Your kids are little.
I know.
William and
Sophia works for us. She does the shipping of our art.
the other one, the blonde girl.
Evelyn. Yeah, they're grown. There's that whole family is going to bless them in this church.
That's great. They're Moldovan or Ukrainian?
Ukrainian.
Oh, that must be so hard for them.
Okay. Oh, Dan went looking for them and they're here. I'll go get Dan now. In Wilston.
They have just, Andrew, just hold mic for a second. You can go ahead and start.
It's on. Well, we welcome you to our afternoon session. And those of you that weren't here this morning, Dr. Andrew Kuninobu and his wife Eileen. Andrew is the medical director of the NEWSTART program at Weimar in Northern California. And Eileen is the dietitian that works with the NEWSTART program. It's an awesome program. I've been through it twice. And I'd go back again. It was so good. And if, like I said this morning, if you need a tune-up in your health, try NEWSTART. You'll love it. So with that, I welcome Andrew and Eileen. So I'm going to give you the mic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad that you all could be here. Eileen, why did we need NEWSTART? That's what we're going to try and answer that question. Why we needed NEWSTART. Now, for those of you who weren't here this morning, we were members here for 20 years before God called us up to Northern California. Raising our kids, going through adventures and pathfinders and doing these various youth activities and all of these different things. And particularly me, how many of you remember Andrew Kuninobu 15 years ago? Okay. I cast a bigger shadow back then, did I not? I did. I'm 35 to 40 pounds lighter now than I was then. We're going to talk a little bit about our journey. And actually, we looked at our picture from 15 years ago?
Maybe.
A Christmas photo. You're not supposed to talk about women's weight, right? But You were a little heavier too.
I was.
So we're going to talk a little bit about our journey along the way. But before we jump in, let's just have a moment of prayer, okay? Loving Father, we thank you so much that you have given us the gift of health and that we have the opportunity to take the gifts that you give us and use them to your honor and glory. And that's certainly our desire today, to be healthier so that we can live lives that give you honor and glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty. How many of you have a health plan? A health plan? Anybody? Health plan? A few people are raising their hands. Okay. When I say that usually for example, our NEWSTART guests, I often ask the question, do you have a health plan? And most of them go, yeah, I have a health plan. What's your health plan? And what do you normally hear? Blue Cross, Blue Shield, right? Kaiser, up there, Sutter. All these different things we hear about when we say a health plan. Some people don't have a health plan. It's tough times. So we ask the question of our guests often, what would an optimal health plan look like? What an optimal, well, there are some categories or things that most people would find helpful. For example, it would be available to everybody. Do you think that's a good idea? Have a health plan that's available to everybody, okay? How many of you ever tried to read your health plan coverage booklet? Even those of us in the medical field have tried to read it, and that's when we realized it wasn't written by physicians, because we don't understand it. Maybe if we asked the lawyers in the crowd, maybe they could understand it. I don't know. But has it ever felt like it's hard to understand? Yes. Okay. How many of you have ever had a health condition that got excluded by your health plan? Oh, I'm sorry, but we don't cover that. Okay. So we're going to flip this around a little bit. Obviously, we're not talking about health insurance here. But an ideal plan, if God were to give us a health plan, it would be none of those things that we were just talking about in terms of what they aren't. They would be all the things that are on the screen that we are. It would be available to everybody, right? It wouldn't be complicated and difficult to understand, and it would address the diseases that you and I struggle with today, right? That would be optimal, wouldn't it? And obviously, like I said, we're not going to talk about health insurance. We're actually talking about something else, which you already know that, about NEWSTART. Now, taking off on addressing today's diseases, what are the top 10 killers of people in the U.S.? Does anybody know? Cancer? Heart disease? Diabetes? Okay, let's take a peek here and see. Yeah, this is the most recent list. It's actually from data from 2022. I don't know why 2023 data hasn't come out yet. I haven't been able to find it. But anyway, I don't think it's changed that much in a year. But heart disease still leads. There was a lot of discussion 20 or 30 years ago. Well, we've made so many advances in medicine that nobody will be dying of heart disease by the time we get to the 2020s. Does anybody remember them saying that? Guess what's still the number one killer? Still heart disease, yeah. And then someone said cancer. Yeah, cancer number 2. Unintentional injuries has to do with accidents and other similar sorts of things that happen, violence, etc. Number 4 on the list was actually COVID-19, because we were still coming out of the pandemic in 2022. Stroke, another cardiovascular disease. Number 5, chronic respiratory diseases. That's like COPD, emphysema, those sorts of things. Alzheimer's has been moving up the list over time, and that's going to move up further, by the way. If we actually had the data from 2023, I would guess that would be higher, and COVID would probably be lower. But anyway, diabetes, someone mentioned that, and then kidney diseases, chronic kidney disease issues, and chronic liver disease like cirrhosis and those sorts of things. These are the things that kill us. Now, that's actually what shows up on the death certificate, because they want to know the immediate cause of death. Why did so-and-so die? And so the doctor has to sit there and based on either what happened in the hospital or just based on their history and the story of what happened at home. And the doctor usually has to write down the most likely reason based on the story that they get. But none of this really tells us the actual underlying thing, because that actually is on the death certificate that most doctors don't spend a whole lot of time on. What were the factors that led to that? For example, if it was a heart attack, well, okay, so the heart attack was the end product of what happened in this person's life, but what were the factors that led up to the heart attack? And those things don't get written down normally, and someone actually decided that they would be good to have a better idea on what causes death actually. What were the contributing causes to the heart attack, to the cancer, to the stroke, to the whatever? And so someone actually did all this, and it was in an article in JAMA a number of years ago, that actually, what are the actual causes of death? If a doctor were to actually write down, this person died from heart disease because of, and was faithfully doing that. And what they found out was, and by the way, number 1 and 2 are neck and neck. It's back and forth depending upon who's doing the study. But the top 2 are tobacco and poor nutrition, what we eat, which of course is near and dear to my dietitian's heart, which she will talk about in a little bit. We'll give her, don't worry, I'm not going to do all the talking. You get to hear her lovely voice also. But actual causes, tobacco and poor diet, okay? Physical inactivity. They actually have called physical inactivity the couch potato syndrome. The new smoking, has anyone ever heard that before? They call it the new smoking. The reason for that is because in terms of just the heart disease, that number 1 killer, it's just as big a deal as smoking used to be. That's why they call it the new smoking. In other words, a couch potato who does not smoke has about the same risk of cardiovascular disease as a smoker who's an athlete. So a smoker, no, George, you don't start smoking based on that. The point is, that's how bad inactivity is for us today. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. Okay, alcohol consumption, you can see microbial agents, viruses, COVID-19 comes to mind, so does the flu, and so do bacterial infections. And then toxic agents like pollutants. I wish I could say we lived in a perfect world. We don't. And we don't have control of what the guy next door is doing, right? Like if you happen to be next door to a manufacturing plant that's spewing all kind of stuff into the air. Like, I have 2 cousins, brothers, both in their, I'm trying to remember their ages. They may have been in their 40s. Both died of pancreatic cancer, 2 brothers. And this was a valley somewhere, and I think they lived in Arkansas, where there was a manufacturing plant. So pollutants, the suspicion is very high that they died from pancreatic cancer because of what they were being exposed to there. Okay, number 7, motor vehicle accidents. Number 8, firearms. Number 9, sexual behavior. And number 10, illicit drug use. Now, what do you notice all of these 10 things have in common? They're avoidable. They're choices. Yeah. These are all choices we make, and what's missing, when you talk about a health plan, we'll cover, hospitalizations for heart attacks or whatever. Most of it is reactionary, isn't it? How many health plans are super proactive in making sure you never get in the hospital to begin with? That would really be ideal, wouldn't it, if we actually identify the things that led to the things that you and I are suffering from. And so what we say is that the missing component in many people's health plan, and I'm going to talk about our plans for our own health now, not our insurance. The missing component is often we leave out lifestyle. And we don't understand how important it really is. And we're going to highlight that as we go along, because remember, this talk is about why we needed NEWSTART. Okay? And maybe there might be a few people here who can relate to our experiences along the way. So lifestyle is the missing component. So, and said another way, the solution to a lot of our health problems in America, a lot of my health problems, your health problems, the problems of the people in this community, it does not depend on who your physician is. It does not depend upon what technological advances you have access to. It's really not about the quality of care that Fallbrook Hospital, or if you're further down the hill here, well, the other way would be Temecula. Palomar Hospital, that direction, this direction, Temecula Valley Hospital. Okay, it's not dependent upon that, quality of your hospital, or how good your health insurance plan is. That's really not the biggest determinant. The most important thing is really the solution for all of us really is about the lifestyle choices you and I make. More importantly, good health depends mainly on what we are willing or not willing to do for ourselves. How we choose to live our life. And that's why we're having this whole discussion, because Eileen and I found out that we thought we were living a pretty healthy life raising our kids here in Fallbrook. And we found out it can be even little things that add up to big things over time. And so we went to Weimar to work in the NEWSTART program a little over 8 years ago. And these are the components of NEWSTART that I shared during the morning hour with you. For some of you who weren't here, this is getting you caught up to speed. These are the components of what NEWSTART stands for: nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, fresh air, rest, and trust in God. And we spent a lot of time during the morning hour talking about the most important component, trust in God. We'll come back to that towards the end, since we're going to go ahead and run through the acronym in order. And now we get the chance for Eileen to jump off with her specialty, which is nutrition.
Okay. So that study was called the Global Burden of Disease Study, that figured out the actual causes of death and for the whole world. And for the United States, the number one cause of death, not just death, but death and disability, was our diet. They call it the standard American diet.
Sad.
Or SAD, yes. And only one type of diet has been proven to treat, and in most cases even reverse, many of our diseases. I'm only listing 4 here, but heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and mild cognitive decline are 4 biggies. They've been proven by studies to be reversed through one type of diet, and that diet is the whole food plant-based diet. So I'm going to explain what that is. Plant-based, you're familiar with that. It's you might be familiar with the term vegan, just eating plants, nothing at all from an animal. But those 2 words, whole food, really makes a difference. It has to be whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, whole beans, whole nuts, and whole seeds, not just parts of those plants. And so when you're talking about white flour, sugar, and oil, they're from plants, but they're just a part of the plant. They're just one little part of the plant that's very concentrated. And when you do that, it's not so good. And so a whole food plant-based diet will actually exclude white flour, white rice, sugar, and oil. It also minimizes these ultra-processed plant foods. All these foods I have here, they're plant-based, they're vegan. I've probably had all of them, but they're not really the best. The primary ingredients are oil or sugar or soy protein. And so when you have too much of that, it's not good. So really minimizing those ultra-processed plant foods. So just be careful with those. And then, of course, the whole food plant-based diet excludes anything at all from an animal, whether it's the flesh or the meat or the milk or the egg. So nothing from there. And, you know, when we were living here in Fallbrook, for the most part, we were plant-based, vegan at home. But when we went out to eat or even church potluck or a friend's house or my mom's house, we weren't that strict. We would have cheese and milk and eggs, ice cream.
Ice cream.
I think ice cream was his downfall.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
you imply if I've fallen and I can't get up.
Yeah.
When I was raised in the church, meaning as a Seventh-day Adventist. So how many of you raised in the church heard a little bit about healthy diet growing up? Okay, maybe I should ask it differently. How many of you when you grew up, had no exposure to healthy diet information? Okay, so a few hands do go up. But see, I was fortunate. I had this opportunity to hear about healthy food growing up. Now, the only problem was that it was the healthy food that my mom and dad learned about when they were at Loma Linda in the 1950s. And for a lot of people growing up in the church, that was vegetarian. That was the message. How many of you can relate to this? The message was be vegetarian. Now, having heard that was the best diet, I actually wasn't raised that way. I was raised in a meat-eating environment in Hawaii. Anyone ever been to Hawaii? Does anybody know about the food culture in Hawaii? You got an idea then, a little bit about where I'm coming from, that, food it is important, especially in that culture. And it was really unusual to have a vegetarian in the church that I grew up in. Very unusual. There were a few. I think growing up, I can only think of a couple that were this thing called vegan.
I didn't know any vegans.
And you didn't know any vegans growing up. Mm-mm. Yeah. So anyway, so a lot of this stuff is a journey that we've been on along the way. But anyway, growing through Loma Linda, as that's where I went for medical school, and I also did work in the School of Public Health there as well, I learned a little bit more. And it wasn't just, vegetarians, good. It's, there's probably something called vegan that's better. But still, somehow, when I got out of Loma Linda and I was in practice and doing all the things that, young and then middle-aged doctors do, I still was swayed heavily by all the data that's thrown at us from the nutritional world, medical meetings, I don't know. Let me cut to the chase. I did not realize that there's a line between food that feeds disease and food that fights disease. Does that make sense? Food that feeds disease and food that fights disease. I just kind of was on a spectrum of, I know the standard American diet's probably really bad because people are dying in America of heart attacks and strokes and things. So here's a standard American diet. And then I would read about in the medical journals, there's a diet that's better than that, and that's the, Mediterranean diet, for example, or, pescatarians or something like that. And alongside of that, often you'd hear, and then there's the vegetarian diet, and then, then alongside of that, somewhere there are vegans. And the separation was just kind of incremental improvements along the way. Has anyone ever else had this thought? I know standard American is bad, but if I become, vegetarian or Mediterranean diet, that's a step in the right direction and it's better. And, maybe a little bit better if I actually made the commitment to vegan. Yes. How about what? Honey. How about honey? I'm going to let my honey answer that question in a minute. Let me finish the thought here, though, on this. Because the point I want to make is, Remember that line that some foods are feeding disease and some foods are fighting disease? That's a bigger line than I've realized. And there is only one diet, that's the point Eileen is making, that's on the fighting disease side. That means that our traditional Adventist approach to diet, the vegetarian diet, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, for example, is on the other side of that line. So when she said that there's only one diet that can reverse disease, that's actually fighting disease, that's a diet that I hadn't even considered for most of my life. I thought I was doing pretty good on this side of the line with being a vegetarian, ignoring the fact there was a lot of data out there that was accumulating, not by Loma Linda any longer, but by researchers at Mayo and Stanford and Harvard and Yale and all of these different places that this was building over time. And I know that this is an audience that knows a lot of this, but there might be a few people that don't. I know there are a few of you in the audience that know some of this because you have someone sitting in this room that's been telling you this stuff for, how long have you been here from Guam? Since 2008, you guys have been hearing this from Wes Youngberg. So I'm not telling you something super brand new, but I'm just telling you where I came from. I was under the mistaken impression that vegetarian was pretty good, especially the fact that we were vegan at home the majority of the time. Well, except for my nightly ice cream. And when I told my people at work, hey, I'm vegetarian, I don't want to have chicken burgers or whatever they were ordering everybody else, chicken enchiladas or whatever, for a business meeting at work, and I had them once or twice a week. Their answer was to order me a grilled cheese sandwich. And I was very appreciative of the secretary going out of her way to accommodate this weird guy who won't eat what everybody else was eating at work. But little did I realize I was still feeding disease. Okay, so the question that was raised, what about honey? Because a lot of people who are vegan don't eat honey. And I'm going to let Eileen answer this. But remember what we said, we're not vegan, we're whole food, plant-based. So what about honey?
I think that you can have a little bit of honey. We're not, vegan is more of an animal rights term. A true vegan won't even wear leather or silk because that exploited animals. So we're not in it for that, although I love animals. It's more for your health. And I think a little bit of honey is okay medicinally and in a big recipe. So
we'll come back to that also in another setting in a second. Yes? So I would agree with you. We should move towards, as much as possible, getting away from refined sugar, and I think that's what she's saying here.
Definitely.
But we can also get ourselves into trouble with too much honey. So we have to be careful.
That's good.
And I will
sugar is
jump.
good.
I'll jump right on board with you. We would be better off with honey than refined sugar. Yeah. All right. Did you want to say anything else about the plant-based diet?
Oh, so when we moved to Weimar and heard about, I'm supposed to teach this, I was actually kind of shocked because it's like, what? I use oil every day. I don't know how to cook without oil. And there were other things. You eat beans instead of veggie meat. I was using veggie meat every day. So beans every day and no oil, and it's like, what? But since we're teaching it, we decided to do it. We don't want to be hypocrites, right? And my husband lost 40 pounds when we did this. My blood sugar was almost pre-diabetic, which Dr. Youngberg told me. My fasting was almost pre-diabetic, and he said, well, if I were to check my 2-hour postprandial, it probably would be pre-diabetic. I'm like, what? But when we started eating this way, my blood sugar is perfectly optimal now. And then your blood pressure, right?
Yeah, all my life I had blood pressure that was in the 130 to 135 over 80 to 85 range, which is not something that historically people would get too excited about. Certainly in the olden days, as in before 3 years ago, nobody was being put on medication for numbers like that. Now, in the last 3 years ago, the American Heart Association and American College of Cardiology came out with new recommendations that now people who are in the 130s over 80s is considered stage 1 hypertension. And that if you don't have any heart disease, you should start making some lifestyle changes. That's in the fine print. And if you already have coronary artery disease, had a stroke, or any other kind of cardiovascular disease, you should be lowered with blood pressure medication. That's the current recommendation. Anyway, most of my life, even from when I was a young man, like I said, I was running 130 to 135 over 80 to 85. Guess what my blood pressure is running now? The last time I checked it was about 3 weeks ago, and it was 112 over 66. You were very close. So it's amazing that, I thought I was doing pretty good, but I needed NEWSTART. I found out that it was, and it's not just nutrition, as we're going to move along here and talk about here. So that we're not here all afternoon, let's move on to exercise very quickly. I don't have to tell you all that it's important to move, do I? No, you all know this. You know why? Because there are benefits to being active. We all know, for example, that it helps people with their weight. We all know this, right? If you ask someone, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm trying to lose weight. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm exercising more and I'm trying to eat right. Those are the two responses everybody gets. Combination of nutrition and exercise. But not only do you lose weight, but people who exercise regularly actually do feel a lot better. And they, believe it or not, you have more energy when you exercise more regularly. Yes, you also have less disease like heart attack, strokes, diabetes, and many, 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 many others, including cancer. And do we have any young? We do have a few young people in here. If you and your young people, if you want them to get better grades in school, get them exercising more. What they find is that people who exercise on a regular basis actually have better brain function. They make better and faster connections between the different neurons, and it helps with also one of the biggest epidemics in the United States today, especially young people, and you know what that is. Anxiety and mood, depression, etc. Yeah. Vitally important for all of that. So what are we supposed to do? Well, the U.S. government has recommendations from their expert panel. It comes from the Health and Human Services Department, and they actually have recommendations for each of us on what we should do. And the bar is really low. Okay, I'm going to tell you this right now. The bar is really low. 150 minutes of activity. When they say moderate, that means that you can tell you're doing something, but you can carry on a conversation. So you might be breathing slightly heavier, you might be perspiring a little bit, but you can carry on a conversation. That's moderate. They recommend 150 minutes per week. If anyone were to do the math on that, that's like barely over 20 minutes a day. Okay, that's the minimum recommendation coming from the Health and Human Services Department. And they also recommend doing some muscle strengthening activity. And that involves getting a lot of your major muscle groups in, not just your legs from walking, but we're talking about your core, your biceps, your triceps, your pecs, your back, lats, and all that kind of stuff. At least a couple days a week, utilizing major muscle groups. A couple days a week of doing that. That is their minimum guideline for Americans. Now, how do you suppose America's doing with that minimum guideline? And again, the bar is really low. We know we're doing poor. Did you know that we're doing so poorly that only 21% of Americans meet those guidelines? And if you take just the aerobic part alone, not even 50%, 49% of Americans get that a little over 20 minutes a day of activity. That means that half of Americans today are below 20 minutes of activity, aerobic activity per day. That's how sedentary as a society we have become. Okay. Now, when we first got to NEWSTART, one of the things that we are told on day one is to walk, walk, walk. In fact, they sold a shirt that actually said, NEWSTART, Weimar, walk, walk, walk on it. Do you remember that shirt, Karen? Oh, you have one. Okay. All right. Well, Eileen's going to talk a little bit more about this exercise component. Let me just pull it all up. Oops, there we go. Got to do it all over again.
Before we went to Weimar, you've heard about walking 10,000 steps a day, right? So we were pretty faithful of doing that. It's not really scientific, but it's something. So we really recommend walking is the best exercise. Most people can walk. You don't need to go and have a gym membership. We can all walk, most people. So we were doing that, but I just recently became convicted that we need to do more, especially at our age. One of my professors at the School of Public Health, he's a physician who's now 100 years old. Maybe he's 101 now, I don't know. But anyway, he's very spry and sharp. He can still give lectures. He lives near Weimar now. And he says that one of the reasons why he is still so agile is because he did a lot of strength training when he was in his mid-age. He owned some property, cut down trees, cleared the land, built his own house, that kind of stuff. And so I've really become convicted. I've seen, our parents' age and our parents' friends, and the ones who did more strength training throughout their lives are much healthier than the ones that didn't.
Much more independent.
Independent, not as frail, able to walk, not fall, all that. So I really think we need to do that. If you don't, ideally, we have a picture there of someone lifting weights. You could go to a gym, but I really recommend God's gym, which is outdoors and gardening. Getting out there. We live on, 2.5 acres in the middle of the forest. We're out there, he's out there chopping down trees and clearing the land and, pulling weeds. And we typically have a vegetable garden, and we don't right now. But, you have to squat down and go up, and being out there in the sun and the fresh air, I think God's gym is the best.
How many of you ever heard of the Blue Zones? Okay, every hand goes up, right? You all know about Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa, Japan. The people of Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa, Japan, they don't pump iron. They don't go to the gym. They don't run marathons. They just make all of these types of activities part of their daily lifestyle. And that's how we have a picture on the bottom right about lifestyle.
Yeah, I know the most about Okinawa, Japan, because I'm Japanese. And traditional Japanese, their tables were that low. You're kneeling on the ground to eat. Their beds were these mats that are just, you lay it on the floor. You're on the floor, and then you roll it up and put it in the closet, and then you take it out and sleep again. So you're constantly getting up and down. You're doing squats all day long. The toilet was just a hole in the ground. Basically, there's an outhouse inside the house. There's nothing to grab onto to stand up. It's literally just a hole in the middle of a room. So you're constantly, even in your 80s, you're squatting up and down, up and down. It's just part of their life. And I know we don't have that type of house now where we live, but you can add components of that into your life right now. get down and play with your grandchildren on the floor, or instead of using a mop, get down on the floor and wipe the floor, things like that. Do you have anything?
Do you have anything to add? Boy, it's not what to say, it's what to leave out when you're strained on time.
I know. Every one of these lecture components can be a separate lecture
Yeah.
on its own.
It could. Well, I think we'll move on to water. We're mostly water. Mostly, yeah, like 2/3 of us, yeah. Are water.
65-70% of our bodies is made of water, and we can live about 6 weeks without food, but only a few days without water. All our cells need water. Most of us are dehydrated.
Do you recognize that? Most of us are dehydrated? Okay.
If you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated, way before that. And dehydration can contribute to many of our diseases: hypertension, heart disease, joint pain. We've seen so many patients that with pain and just the fact of drinking water, their back pain is gone, their arthritis is gone. Poor cognition, your brain needs water, and headaches.
Yeah, let me share about headaches, because I used to have headaches fairly regularly. So maybe some of the Fallbrook church members don't know this, but when we lived here, I would sometimes get sidelined by headaches on the order of once or twice a month. You get hit with a really bad headache, like a migraine type of a headache, the kind that you have to go to a dark room. If you don't, you feel nauseated and all that kind of stuff. I don't know all the reasons why, but I'm sure hydration was a large part of that, because it was not unusual, and maybe some professionals in this room can identify with this. It was not unusual to get to work in the morning and get so busy with work that before you knew it, it was lunchtime and you realized you hadn't had a single thing to drink in the last 4 hours, and you were then busy, you were wolfing down your lunch, and then suddenly you realize it's been 8 hours and you even haven't been to the bathroom. I mean, that's the life of a lot of busy professionals, unfortunately. And I have no doubt that water was part of this whole thing, that when I started making a commitment to carrying water around and drinking and just not being dehydrated, I literally went from migraine-type headaches once or twice a month to I cannot even remember the last time I had a headache. I mean, I don't honestly remember the last time. When I tell my NEWSTART guests that, I always say, yeah, watch, this will be the time that I get a headache. But it hasn't happened in so long now, I just don't know when the last time was. You know, I tell my guests also that, did you know your kidneys, when you are dehydrated, like the average person is a little behind all the time, your kidneys actually do spit out a chemical that raises your blood pressure? I have no doubt that it wasn't just weight loss that helped me with my blood pressure journey. It also is the fact that I'm staying hydrated. The kidneys don't have to say, hey, send more fluid down this way because we need to be, straining something. You're not sending enough fluid down here. The kidneys don't have to send that signal out anymore. It doesn't have to raise the pressure because it's getting plenty of flow through there. Okay. Let's see. Did we miss that whole thing?
Yeah,
we were behind. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Here's the slide for what we were just talking about. All right. So what is the best beverage then? Thank you. We won't have to spend too much time on this. How much? Lots. Thank you, Dan. Good answer.
I grew up learning you're supposed to drink 8 glasses a day, right? But really, it makes more sense that it depends how big you are, how, your mass. And so in general, for most people, if you drink a ½ ounce of water for every pound of weight, that's a good rule of thumb.
Good
or in other
starting
words,
point, at
if
least.
you're 200 pounds, then you drink 100 ounces a day. Or a better rule of thumb is you're drinking enough when your urine is pale yellow to clear. Then you know that you're drinking enough water.
So when people first get to NEWSTART, this is what we tell them: start drinking. And I know that some people say, I feel so waterlogged because they're so not used to it. But people do get used to it, and by the end of this session, they're usually doing very well, thank you, with drinking so much water and helping them get through. I have a question in the back. Ouch. Was he still dehydrated? Yes. Here's why. Alcohol is actually a diuretic. What's a diuretic? Some people call diuretic pills water pills. There's a kind that get rid of water. So most people in prevention and in primary care, internal medicine, etc., they view alcoholic beverages as a neutral to -1. A neutral to -1. Yeah, because, and it's not just alcoholic beverages that do that. Caffeine does that too, by the way. So people who think, well, I drink lots of Coke or Pepsi, or I have a cup of coffee in the morning, so I replenish my fluid in the morning with a cup of coffee. Unfortunately, that's not true. That's actually a -1, and it makes the internal hydration even a bit worse. And so, by the way, this recommendation about what we just had up here, 1/2 ounce for every pound of body weight, we do qualify that some people have medical conditions that they are not able to drink that much, like certain people with heart failure or other issues. They may have to adjust that and work with their physician on that number. That's just a general rule of thumb or a general guide. So, now water is not just internal; it can be external too. What's that about, Eileen?
What we started doing when we moved to Weimar and started working for NEWSTART was to end every shower with turn it to complete cold and end with 30 seconds of cold. And that really helps with circulation, it boosts your immune system. It actually feels good when you get out.
Sure wakes you up too.
Yeah, you don't need that cup of coffee, right?
Nope.
When we are feeling sick, then we will do more than that. We'll do 3 minutes of hot, and then 30 seconds of cold, and then you repeat that 3 times, and you end with a cold. And it seems like since we've moved, we don't get sick as much.
I definitely don't.
Yeah, I definitely don't. I used to get a cough, cold, I don't know how many times a year. And
4 to 6 times a year. At least for me.
Maybe. And now we don't. And this is one of the reasons, I'm sure, the external water.
You know what's really interesting is that my dad used to do this. He ended every shower with cold water. And I'm going, how did he know that? They used to teach this at Loma Linda to the medical students. They used to teach them to the nursing students. Somehow, that age-old wisdom of hydrotherapy, we call it, got lost along the way. And it's so simple. And even though this is not exactly, there's a sister to hydrotherapy called hydrothermal therapy. Has anyone ever heard of hydrothermal therapy? I mean, this is a form of it, the contrast between heat and cold. There's a specific way of doing that on the chest that has a very strange name called chest fomentations. Yeah, some of you have heard about that. I can personally vouch for chest fomentations because I was one of those individuals who, since I was young, always, when I get a virus, people get a virus and they get sick. When Andrew gets a virus, since the time I was a kid, he gets SICK, capital letters, sick. I was just, some kids have a really strong, I really should not have become a physician based on knowing my physiology and how easily I would get sick and how sick I got. Anyway, so I did actually not do as well as some people with COVID-19. And I was one of those individuals whose oxygenation was actually in that first wave with the Delta, particularly the Delta wave that was so horrendous. I was one of those individuals with oxygenation that was running low. I was running 88%, kind of low. Technically speaking, what were you supposed to do with an 88 oxygenation back in those days? Go into the hospital. Yeah, go into the hospital. But before succumbing to that decision, I decided to apply knowledge that I had been learning about hydrotherapy. And I asked our program director at NEWSTART who also knew how to do chest fomentations, and he prayerfully came and applied chest fomentations at home to me. And after the very first chest fomentation, my oxygenation went from 88 and jumped to 90. Just with that one, and he came every day, and every day it went 90, 92, 94, 96, just like that. And I really, believe that there are a lot of things that we in the medical profession have lost sight of, because again, this hydrothermal therapy was taught to our physicians and nurses back in the olden days, and we have just lost track of it. So never underestimate some of this old knowledge from the sages, if you will. So, yes? So the question that she's asking is it okay to do a contrast shower at night? Now, if we're specifically talking about the 3 minutes and 30 seconds and doing it 3 times over, where you're actually doing that, like you're feeling like you're getting sick, you really need to make sure it's not so much the time as what you have time for afterwards, because you need to be able to lie down for at least 30 minutes after that. At least 30 minutes, better yet an hour to rest afterwards to get the full benefit. Because if you do that and then just rush off, you actually will lose some of the benefit that you were going to get.
So it is actually good right before going to bed.
So if we feel like we're coming down with something, we'll do that before we go to bed and then go to sleep after that. All right. Oh, mercy, where is the time going? Take our time? All righty, we'll take it. No, we'll still move along. Let's talk about sunlight for a second. What's the first thing you think of when I say sunlight? Vitamin D. Okay. Let's talk about vitamin D for a second. Is it important? Yeah, vitamin D is important. Helps prevent disease, helps boost immunity, or at least it's connected with that. It is a hormone, actually, in the body. It's not a vitamin, it's a hormone as it functions in the body. And then it actually is important with the production of serotonin, which is important for, well, that's one of the main ones, as many of you know, with your brain, sense of well-being, mental flexibility, etc. And the only way that you and I get vitamin D is through conversion in the skin, and then in combination with a cycle through liver and kidney. Correct. In other words, we don't take it in orally. It's not found in any of the foods that we normally eat. We need sun exposure for that generation cycle. And what we know now is that with people who don't get enough sunlight, they often will run low. And most people are afraid of the sun today. Right? It seems that way, at least. Because most of the people spend their entire existence indoors. One of the lowest vitamin D levels I ever saw was single digits, and it was in a young person up at Weimar, not a student, but a worker at one of our clinics there, and she was in the single digits with vitamin D. And she said, well, I'm afraid to go out in the sun because that's where you get, skin cancer, etc. But we actually need sunlight, and it's more than vitamin D. It's way more than vitamin D. In fact, when early on when they looked at vitamin D and they found out that people with higher levels of vitamin D seemed to survive COVID-19 much better than those with low vitamin D levels, and they thought it was the D, and they started adding D into people's regimen. That may have helped with some things, but they weren't getting the full immunity benefit because D was probably just a marker for sunlight exposure. And it's the sunlight that makes the big difference. We're going to turn the page on that in just a second. Before we do, sunlight's also, besides vitamin D production, it is important for production of other things like melatonin, not at the time of exposure, but later on at night. Our circadian rhythm that sets our clock that tells us what time it is internally and knows that at the evening when it starts to get 9, 10 o'clock at night, that the body's supposed to get tired and go to sleep. It does that by starting to pump out melatonin. That's what it's supposed to do. And it's the sunlight in the morning that tells the body when to start that clock for the day. So without that morning sun, we are less likely to get that melatonin spike at bedtime to help us to sleep. They've also done studies with sunlight. People who get out in the sun first thing in the morning, in particular, between 6 and 9 a.m. for at least 45 minutes, they actually will find that they lose weight more easily. In fact, there was a study on middle-aged women. That's the only thing that they did in that study, was put them through a regimen of getting outside for 45 minutes, somewhere between 6 and 9 a.m. That was the only difference between the study group and the control group, and the study group started losing weight, even though the diet was the same, their activity levels were the same, etc. And we all know that the sun is antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral. Actually, our grandparents knew this because they used to put their bedding out on the line, right, to help kill the bacteria and viruses. Yes? Glad you asked that question. Let's move into the next slide and we'll help answer that, okay? For vitamin D, it might to some degree, but again, you don't need a lot of exposure, even if you're partially covered. The reason that people cover, by the way, is to protect them against the damaging rays, which is the short wavelength of light we call UV rays. What we're going to talk about in this slide is something totally different. On the other end of the visible spectrum from UV, the short wavelength, are longer wavelength of radiation, if you will, wavelength of light from the sun. They call near infrared. So near infrared, so there's visible spectrum, near infrared, infrared, and over on this side is UV. UV is the damaging one. All right? We're going to talk a little bit about near-infrared light here, because near-infrared light, it penetrates through clothing. It actually, certain types of glass, it can penetrate. They also have some now that are not as good at doing that, especially double and triple pane windows. But generally speaking, it can penetrate into our bodies when we're out and about. Even when we're in the shade of a tree, that near-infrared can penetrate in through the shade of the tree, if you will, by bouncing off of the leaves, etc., and getting through that and getting into our bodies. And it has no trouble penetrating into our bodies. And this is not damaging rays. The near-infrared is actually the opposite. It's very beneficial for our bodies. So much so that it's probably related to most diseases that you and I come down with. Here's the leaves part. Here it is. Let me explain how this works. Every single one of our cells has a little thing or little packets in it that are the energy-producing part of the cell. We call the mitochondria. How many of you remember your high school biology and making a model of the cell, and you had the little mitochondria? Okay, the little tiny mitochondria. Those are the things that give it that convert chemical into energy that our body can utilize, if you will. I'm going to try and simplify this as much as possible. So if you have, if you will, an engine, using an analogy in our world, when you have an engine that's running, our engines that we have, like our internal combustion engine, we call ICE nowadays, internal combustion engine, produces heat. How do we dissipate that heat? In 99.9% of engines today. With water or through a radiator system, right? And we remove the heat. If we don't do that, what's going to happen to the engine? It's going to overheat, burn, seize up, etc. Okay. The body is a little bit different, but there are byproducts to the production of energy in our little mitochondria. And we call it oxidative stress. Have any of you ever heard that term, oxidative stress? And what oxidative stress can do is damage our cells, including the nucleus and our DNA, making it more likely to have mutations and all those sorts of things. The very fascinating thing about infrared light is as it penetrates into our bodies to every single cell, it works at the level of the mitochondria to stimulate production of melatonin inside the mitochondria. Yeah, that same chemical that we produce in our brain to help us to sleep at night, different role. Different role. Within their cells, in the mitochondria, that infrared light stimulates the production of melatonin. And melatonin is like the coolant for our system. It's a powerful antioxidant within the cell to neutralize the oxidative stress. Very powerful. And so without this process of going out in the sunlight, we cheat ourselves, if you will, of the ability to have this melatonin bathing ourselves, if you will, on the inside that reduces the oxidative stress. In other words, we're removing the coolant from our system when we don't go out in the sunlight. Isn't that interesting? And that's probably actually more important than this whole thing that you've heard about with vitamin D. I'm not going to say D is not important. It is. What I am saying is that this is probably even more important because this has to do with the function of every cell in our body. Mitochondrial problems can affect us in so many different ways with so many different diseases, not to mention, of course, cancer. Remember I said a minute ago, oxidative stress causes damage. Without the intracellular melatonin, we are more likely to succumb to random mutations and problems with the nucleus of our cell and cell damage and all those sorts of things. This is one of the most exciting areas of discovery in the last 3 years to me about sunlight. And who knew? Who knew? You know, a lot of people said, well, I won't go out in the sun because I don't want to get sun damage and get skin damage, so I'll just take my vitamin D pill. And it was so much more than that. Again, this is a type of radiation that does not cause skin damage. So we still recommend that people be careful about getting out when the UV rays are the worst, and that's between 10 and 2. And a lot of people, depending upon your skin type, should cover up. And clothing is important to actually block the damaging rays. And it can do that. But remember, this kind of the good radiation, even in the shade of a tree, you get that. So I tell patients, go out in the shade of a tree. Unless it's so it's so hot that you're baking because it's 100 degrees out. Most people can go in the shade of a tree when it's in the 70s and 80s and be perfectly comfortable. And yes, you can even go out in the shade of a tree when it's in the 40s or 50s. And remember, most normal clothing, the IR will still, the near infrared will still penetrate at that level. And Eileen has a personal testimony about this. I do? Yes, you do.
I don't know. Well, yeah, so now whenever we get sick, rather than sleeping in the bed with the curtains closed, I actually go outside. I go outside and I will rest under the sun, or if it's too hot, then under the shade of the tree. And I personally think that when Andrew got so sick with COVID, at that time, there was this big forest fire nearby, not too close, but the winds was blowing the smoke to our house, and so we could not go outside. The air quality was so bad that we were stuck inside, and I'm sure that had something to do with why he couldn't get well so quickly.
As well as I normally could. Yes.
Yeah.
They're probably not as wide spectrum nor as bright as the sunlight. When right now, do the lights in here seem fairly bright? Yeah, so, medium. They say the average indoor lighting is, 100 lux?
Something like that.
Well, if you step outside right now, do you know what the sunlight level is? Like 100,000 lux. So I guess the answer to the question is it may be better than nothing, but your sunlight is always going to be better. The natural near IR. Yes, sir.
Now, with melatonin, you have talked about the two aspects, allowing for the brain and the serotonin production, and then the other is for the coolant factor for the cells. Do taking melatonin supplements help both?
Well, taking melatonin supplements can help some, but the problem with the melatonin supplements is if you take them too regularly, you can actually at some point in time suppress your own body's melatonin production. And so it's not recommended for people to take it long term. It's better to let the body produce it. Short term, it can be helpful. Like when people are traveling, sometimes taking some melatonin to help with jet lag or something like that can be helpful. But generally speaking, it's better to let the body produce it naturally. So, okay, let's move on because how many have we gone through and we're only on temperance? Oh, mercy. Okay. I think you want to talk about temperance for a moment?
Okay. So temperance is not moderation in all things. It's much more than that. Temperance is proper balance. It's moderation in the things that are good for us and completely avoiding the things that are bad for us. Because you can get too much of a good thing. You can get too much sunlight. You can get too much water. You can get too much exercise.
Believe it or not, it's true.
I think marathon runners, their immune system go down right after a race. You can even eat too much. You can overeat of good whole food, plant-based foods. So that's my take on temperance. I think you had something.
The interesting thing about temperance is that it intertwines itself with all these other ones we've been talking about. For example, nutrition, you have to apply temperance to nutrition. It's not just what you eat, but how much you eat. So there's an aspect where you have to apply temperance to the nutrition component. You have to apply temperance to the exercise component. Because yes, it is possible, just like you can have too little exercise, you can actually have too much. Most people don't know this, but athletes who spend a lot of their time at a very high level, for example, cyclists that do the Tour de France and have been doing that year after year after year, they actually have a higher rate of other kinds of heart problems than you would normally expect. Normally you think, well, those guys would never have heart disease. Well, of course, when they stop riding, they might get traditional heart disease. But they have way more problems with atrial fibrillation and other rhythm disturbances, and they actually die at a higher rate from rhythm disturbance issues than athletes who are more, quote, moderate in their level of activity. And a lot of things in nature are this way. In science, we call it a J curve, where too little and the risks are high, too much and the risks are high, and there's a sweet spot. And that's what God is trying to teach all of us about, is the sweet spot for many of these things. Nobody in their right mind, for example, would think that there's a good level, a good level of that what they would call, let me back up. I want to address this moderation in all things, because I hate that expression. Moderation in all things. Is there anything that's moderate about eating arsenic? No one would say that I can eat arsenic moderately, right? So moderation of all things flies right out the window with arsenic or other overt, obvious poisons. Does anybody think that there's a healthy level of cigarette smoking? I mean, we all know now that there isn't a healthy level of cigarette smoking. So moderation in all things really should not be a part of our vocabulary. But understanding the J curve for healthy things, yes, moderation of healthy things.
Yeah, I think you can get too much sleep too.
Believe it or not, that's true. People who sleep less than 5 hours increase their likelihood of diabetes. People who sleep more than 9 hours a night increase their likelihood of diabetes. Very interesting. All right. We have a quotation here from just because we thought it was funny.
Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said, "Joy, temperance, and repose slam the door on the doctor's nose."
You know, these folks from years past, they seem to know a lot of good stuff. I don't know. Whatever happened. Okay, let's move on to air very quickly. Most of you are aware that fresh air is good, right? Okay. Why? Because it's good. But why? Oxygen. Okay. All right. Normal outdoor air, in particular in natural environments, natural spaces, there is actually a charge to the air, and it's a negative charge. And you and I want to breathe negatively charged air. They've actually had studies done in the Middle East on something called the Sharav, S-H-A-R-A-V, I believe is how it goes, which is a Middle Eastern Santa Ana on steroids. Okay? Are you with me on this? It's a hot, dry desert air that is so bad that it brings a lot of positive charges into the air with it. And they've actually done studies that the people who have to experience living in that, when the sharab is blowing, there's a 30% jump in anxiety, depression, irritability, stomach issues, a whole bunch of myriad of list of things that happen just from the positively charged air. Because negatively charged air is good for our health. Positively charged air is the opposite. So when it's negatively charged, it actually helps our lung to function better through a number of different things by protecting the lungs, for example. The cilia work better that remove junk out of our lungs. It lowers body temperature and their resting heart rate. Helps people to be more at ease. It actually improves learning and a sense of well-being as well as decreased anxiety. So you want your student to learn better, put have them go study outside by the outdoor waterfall, the little fountain you have in the backyard. Decreases the survival of bacteria and viruses in the air. We're talking about negatively charged air. And we know that these ions are formed around ocean, waterfalls, evergreen trees. Good time to get a lot of negatively charged air is after a thunderstorm. Probably not best to walk out in the middle of one, especially if you're in the Midwest where you might get hit by lightning. But afterwards, wow. And have you ever noticed that after the rain and you go out and man, that feels good when you breathe that air? That's the negatively charged air. And unfortunately, when we live in environments like we do here, where we have a central system, and most of you work in offices that have central air, and it recirculates air, and the recirculated air in buildings, even if there isn't a smoker nearby, even if you don't have terrible stuff in your flooring or in your cabinets that's off-gassing, unfortunately most of us do, or you live in a smog polluted area, just the fact that you're recirculating that air actually does also add positive ions to the air, and we actually need fresh air. Now, the Japanese are strange people. I can say that because I'm half Japanese, okay? And I'm married to a Japanese. But we're American, Japanese American. But they've known all kinds of, they do weird and interesting things. Did you know there's this thing called forest bathing? Yeah, some of you have heard about this then. Okay, for those of you who haven't heard about this, there's this thing called forest bathing. The Japanese have been doing it for years, where they go out in the forest, they breathe the air of the forest. And they've tried to figure this whole thing out, and what they figured out was that the scent from the trees, like the pine, the cedar, the fern, etc., they actually let off chemicals that when you breathe them, they increase the natural killer cell numbers in our bloodstream, and they also increase the activity of the ones that are there. Both. Interesting. And they figured this out by studying people, by sending them out to retreats where they would go out in the forest for a bit, or they'd go outside in the city somewhere in the sunshine. So they knew it wasn't sunshine, it wasn't away from work, it wasn't any of these things, but it was specifically these chemicals in the forest. And what they found was that this boost in immunity could last up to a month later, that there was a difference when they measured the natural killer cell activity in these people's bloodstream. How long? Well, in their studies, they were out for a couple hours in the study. So obviously spending some time, the more the better, probably. And I'm not sure if any of us know what the minimum is. Yeah, Joe. She sure did. Yeah, isn't that amazing? How did she know that? She wasn't Japanese. God knew, didn't he? And he was sharing that knowledge with us. So further thinking about the Japanese, by the way, those that live in heavily forested areas in Japan, they actually have lower rates of cancer, like breast cancer and prostate cancer. All right, we're coming finally towards the end. Eileen, tell us about rest.
We need to sleep, right? It restores our body, physical body, and our mental health, our brains. It's the time when our bodies restore and rebuild. And the sweet spot that my husband was talking about was 7 to 8 hours a night. If you don't sleep, it can lead to many diseases: hypertension, heart attack, stroke, diabetes. It weakens your immune system. It affects your brain. And it's interesting, the best sleep happens in the hours before midnight. Ideally, it'd be good to go to sleep around 9 o'clock at night. Those 3 hours are really beneficial. And I just know from personal experience, it really weakens my immune system if I don't sleep well. But that's a big problem. I think right now it's worse. Most of us are not getting enough sleep, and it's because of many things. We're not active like we're supposed to. If you're physically active, then you'll get more tired and you'll sleep better. Of course, alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine affect your sleep. It is better to sleep on an empty stomach. The last food should be eaten at least 4 hours before bed. And so I notice that when I eat dinner, I can't sleep as well. And it's good to have a set bedtime and awakening time. Don't stay up late on Saturday night and sleep in on Sunday morning. It's better to just have the same schedule every day of the week. And I think this is the main reason why most of us are having a hard time. We're just inundating ourselves with either the TV, the computer, your device, iPhone, iPad, and you're getting that blue light is hitting your eyeball at nighttime. And that's telling your body, your circadian rhythm, that it's morning, it's time to get up. And so you don't get tired. And so we really need to get rid of that stuff in the evening and just turn down all the lights at night. When you're actually sleeping, it's good to be in a very quiet, cool, dark, well-ventilated. We crack the windows open. Make sure, don't even have a little nightlight on, just completely dark, and you'll get better sleep. And to have a mind at peace with God and with others. Leave your worries behind.
We've had many patients who have trouble with their sleep. And I can't say that I've got the perfect recipe. This is some pointers that we have. What I have found is that even if people don't sleep, I tell them to stay in bed for the 8 hours. And during that time, even if you're not, quote, asleep or you don't think you're asleep, a lot of people will be drifting in and out of REM. Have any of you ever experienced this where you have a dream or a thought that just you wake up with, and then it seems like you keep having that thought or dream as you're trying to go back to sleep, and then finally you wake up and go, might as well just get up, I'm not sleeping, but you've had that same thought. You're actually probably running into REM part of that time. And so I tell people, just stay in bed, it's okay. And if you really feel like you need to do something while you're lying there, what I've been telling many of my patients is that that's a good time for intercessory prayer. Yeah, it's okay to pray about your own whatever's on your mind that woke you up, or please help me to go back to sleep, or whatever the case may be. But really, to be able to pray for somebody else, to intercede on their behalf while you're lying there, what better way to use your time if God, for some reason, has awoken you? And maybe there's a reason that you're awake at that time. And we've all heard stories like that mom woke up and she was impressed that she needed to pray for her son, and then they find out that he was like getting in an accident right at that moment or whatever. We've heard those kinds of stories. Let's be sensitive to the fact that God sometimes utilizes those times and is looking for us to say, okay, rather than getting upset, stressed, or whatever, just go ahead and use that time to intercede in the behalf of others. And I've had many NEWSTART guests tell me that when they do that, something comes to mind, they pray about it, and before they know it, it's morning, they actually fell asleep. They didn't even realize it in their prayers. And so I just really, really encourage people to utilize that little trick. And of course, that supersedes, of course, or that assumes a belief in God and a trust in God and a relationship with Him, which we spent a little bit of time talking about this morning, our trust in God. And how we feel that this truly is the foundation to the physical house that we build. All of these principles are foundation. The foundation is on the trust in our relationship with God.
Yeah, I really feel that the trust in God is the most important part. I'm just going to relate a story of one of our NEWSTART guests. I had heard by listening to different conferences online that
Like Wes's.
I don't think I heard this from him, but you could actually reverse type 1, a child who was just recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I thought, oh, how is that possible? I was very skeptical because their own body attacked their pancreas and they can't make insulin anymore, right, for type 1. But one of our guests was a little boy. He was, I forgot, 7, 8 years old, just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And he had a continuous glucose monitor. That's something that's on your arm. And so it's continuously telling his mom through the phone what his blood sugar is. If it gets too high, it'll beep. If it gets too low, it'll beep, and then she'll know what to do. And he was on, I forget how many units of insulin a day, and slowly, it was becoming less and less insulin. What she noticed was if he exercised, which for a little boy was just running outside and playing, his blood sugar would come down 100 points. If he drank water, it would go down 50 points. If he did hydrotherapy, which for a little boy was just playing in the hot tub, it would go down 50 points. And he was at the point where he didn't need any insulin. And then one day, he was playing Legos with a staff child the same age, and the staff child got upset for whatever reason and just went, all the Legos went flying to the floor, which got our patient upset, and immediately the phone beeped. His blood sugar went really high. And so the mother's like, oh, okay, well, let's pick up the Lego and let's go outside and play, because she knew that, well, normally his sugar would go down. So they went outside and played. The sugar didn't go down. She said, oh, well, let's drink some water. And the sugar didn't go down. It stayed high. So that taught me a lesson. It's like, wow, when you have negative emotions, in his case it was anger, but I know it's true for bitterness, unforgiveness, stress, anxiety, anything negative like that in your mind, it affects your body. And even though you're doing the right things, it's not going to work very well. So I feel with the trust in God, where you don't get angry like that and you have an appropriate way to deal with stress, really is the key to health.
Amen. We have a closing verse for you as we close today. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. We're all familiar with that part. Let's move on, though. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. And that is our hope and prayer for each of us today, that we will trust in the Lord with all our hearts. And we won't lean on our own understandings or our own biases or our own reluctance to let something go that we need to let go. For me, it was pizza.
And ice cream.
And ice cream. I'm glad, by the way, I'm really glad that I did. Fallbrook family, those of you that we used to go out camping together, remember the days we would go camping together? And I was struggling a bit just getting off the ground. I didn't like sleeping on the ground because my joints would ache trying to get off the ground and bent over and trying to get out of a tent. Praise the Lord. We went camping last weekend for the first time in eons with a tent, our smaller tent, not our bigger tent, too. And it was like, what was I having trouble with? I mean, I'm zipping the tent, I was climbing in and out, I was getting up and down off the floor, I was, changing without, I used to struggle lying there on the ground trying to pull my pants on because it hurt too much to try and do this kind of a thing, bent over. I don't know, praise God. I don't hurt like I used to. And And I hope that's your experience too. Fill in the blank for you. Everybody's different. Maybe it's not aches and pains. Maybe it is blood pressure. Maybe it is something else. But God has healing for each one of us. So we thank you. We have time for just a couple questions. Yes.
Doctor, I have a question. This year I was in shock because in a regular checkup, the doctor discovered that I have a tumor in my right kidney of 4 centimeters. And the doctor recommended me the surgery. So I was trying to avoid the surgery with natural treatments. And I was doing the castor oil compress pad.
Mm-hmm.
But after 2 months, I went to an ultrasound to check how it worked. But instead of stopping or reducing, it grew 2 millimeters more. So my question now, and the doctor said that after the surgery they're going to see if I'm facing cancer or not, which that word I don't like to hear. I guess nobody likes to hear about
Mm-hmm.
cancer. So my question now is, do you think there's a special treatment, natural treatment, in order to avoid the surgery? Because I guess in 2 months need to face surgery.
So for those of you who can't hear, she's asking a question about having a growth that may or may not be cancerous, and are there natural things that can help beyond the things that she's tried, which was castor oil and contrast? Yeah. And I'll be the first to tell you that I'm not a naturopath, and that I don't know what the end or the exhaustive list might be. There's always things that I read about. But what I tell people is that that's a decision to make between you and God. What does God want you to do? Because we've had patients come through with cancer to NEWSTART, and we've had miraculous healings. We've had people who've had literally a cancer that was going to need to be removed surgically, go back and have surgery either delayed or postponed or even canceled because they didn't have it any longer. But I've also had patients with cancer who were really convicted that they were going to try this, that, or the other thing, and it made no difference. I don't think it's as simple as, like we talked about in church today, it's of 1 + 1 = 2. And it's a very private and personal road that you're on when it comes to potential tumors that might be cancer. And it's really between what God wants you to do. And I've had people who have convicted on not doing any treatment other than quote-unquote natural means. I've also had people who are very convicted that God was asking them to go ahead and do more traditional treatments. And I cannot fault either one because it's a personal decision. There are things that what we do know is that people who are on a whole food plant-based diet and sleeping and getting their exercise and doing all of these different things, that if they do decide that they are going to undergo more traditional treatments that are being used today, the toxicity is much, much less. For example, people who have to go through chemotherapy, the side effects are greatly less. And there's discussion among people, I am not a cancer specialist, but there's discussion among some people in the cancer world that understand these NEWSTART principles, that the doses may be able to be much less toxic too and still get the benefit from if they do need chemotherapy or radiation or what have you. Cancer is a very difficult question, and I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. Is the best way to answer that question. Yeah.
For those of us who may not live near the ocean with the negatively charged ions, what about those devices that they used to come out with called the ionic breeze?
Yeah, I haven't read anything that, and maybe there's somebody more versed on this than I, but I have not read anything that makes me comfortable with them yet. Because some of the ones that, for example, have a setting for our air doctor we have at home has a setting that says, negative ion generator. My understanding is that some of the process that you do to do that is through ozone. production, and I'm not sure that I'm comfortable personally with increasing the ozone just to get that negative. I think it's better to have a lot of indoor plants and put in fountains around the house for running water. And if you have to run your air conditioning because you guys live in this insufferably hot area of Southern California. No, not here, but people who are a little bit further away, like Temecula Valley on up towards Riverside, San Bernardino. You know, it's not a reality to open the windows and get fresh air because of the smog or what have you. Then I think an air purifier along with plants, and then naturally hydrating as much as you can the air by running fountains and things can help mimic that to some extent. What I tell patients, though, is if you live in a city environment where you don't have a lot of exposure to the natural ocean or a forest for forest bathing, get away once a month at least to the mountains, into God's creation, into the forest. You guys are fortunate. You're close enough that you can go down to the beach and get the ocean breeze and things there. But there's still something about getting out into the trees, up into the mountains, up into Idlewild or up to, Julian or whatever, and spending some time forest bathing there once a month to help your immune system. Yeah.
I've been told that the negative ions that you receive when you're in the forest, that if you burn trees, you burn natural wood in just a wood burning fireplace, that releases those negative ions, and you get that same release that you do, or that same benefit, whatever, from the sun.
And I don't know. My concern would be the smoke and particulate matter, but it may release some of that too. I don't know. That's possible. Yeah, Gene?
In the case of vitamin D acquired by sunlight, is it possible to wash that off?
Is it possible to wash that off? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's possible to wash that off. We're maybe too clean. I don't know. Do you have a take on that, Wes? Agreed? Yeah, you can wash it off. So it's better to, if that's your concern with vitamin D and exposure, not being too aggressive with washing off, especially after you've been outdoors. Let it sit for a while.
I'd like to encourage the sister in the front with cancer or mass. We talk to your patients about epigenetics and health, lifestyle. And my alma mater has several, studies, different investigators that have shown, you can affect your ability to turn on and turn off genes, turn off bad ones, turn on the good ones. So, I loved your sermon this morning. Trusting God is so important. And Bob, your patient from 8 years ago, that's nothing more than miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
I think he trusted implicitly in the Lord. Mm-hmm. And the Lord's going to guide you, sister. Do the best you can. Everything's going through the book of life, which is your chromosomes.
Well said. Well said. In fact, we're a congregation of together. We're here to support one another. I'd like to suggest that we all go home and put our sister in the top of your prayer list, as she's shared for us today, a challenge that she's facing. So, all right. We need to close. Dan, do you have something?
I think I saw Leslie had her hand up. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Bonsai trees. I love bonsai trees. I'm Japanese. But how much are they going to help with our air? They're so tiny. If you had a forest of them, maybe. I think the more greenery you can put in the house, though, the better it'll help with it. And there's nothing wrong with a bonsai except that they're small.
Before we have a prayer, how many would you like to thank Dr. Andrew and Eileen for coming tonight? Okay, thank you.
Praise God.
We greatly appreciate whenever we send somebody off as missionaries, and we sent you as missionaries to Weimar 8 years ago, to have you come back and share. And I have to say there's less of you than there was when we sent you away, which you commented on, which all of us could probably take a page out of that book. It would be good for us. But I just would like to have, before we have prayer, I just want to invite Dr. Wes Youngberg to come up for a moment. We have another program that Karen and Dr. Youngberg and the Health Committee have been working on coming up shortly that I just want him to give you a little preview of.
Well, this was a great preview. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew and Eileen, for such a great presentation. Obviously, these 8 doctors, right, these 8 natural remedies are the core, the fundamental, and we will continue to address that. Next Sabbath afternoon at 2 o'clock, I will be presenting on optimizing our immune system naturally. Obviously, everything discussed today is a key, pivotal, fundamental part of that, and we'll expand on that further, where I'm going to be looking at the lessons learned from the Spanish flu. There's some really interesting lessons that hardly anybody knows about that were kind of ignored all the time, not completely during COVID, but largely that were extremely effective, and now studies with COVID, dealing with COVID, have reestablished how critical these natural and simple remedy strategies are. So we're going to be looking at multiple natural strategies to optimize the immune system, both preventive but also therapeutic. So what happened, like, for instance, this summer has been a really unusual summer for respiratory infections. I hear that a lot. I keep up with a lot of the medical literature. I just heard a presentation from Europe showing that the ERs and basically there's been a lot going on in Europe relative to respiratory and other related infections, much more unusually high for the summer compared to past summers. Okay, and the concern is that as we move into the fall, we're actually right there, as we move into the fall and winter, there's going to be a serious uptick of immune problems, of many complications due to various infections. And a big reason for that is a significant increase in immune deficiency. So we're going to be addressing how do we address the problem where so many of us have significant immune deficiency right now compared to years ago, and how do we prevent problems in the near future, and how do we aggressively tackle when we are exposed with a problem. As you know, about basically in January, February of 2020, Dan and I in particular spent quite a lot of time educating the church about everything that was happening and what we were expecting relative to the beginning of COVID, and we didn't lose one church member from COVID. Yeah, there was one person who died. He did not die of COVID. I know because he was my patient prior to him having COVID. He was actually died because of a medication reaction he was given. He had a stroke due to Eliquis. Okay, so the bottom line is that if we follow some of the basic strategies, we're going to be okay even if we get infected. Okay, but we need to be much more rigorous now because we just need to be prepared, and we're going to address that in detail next Sabbath afternoon. Thank you.
Amen.
How many of you have enjoyed having an afternoon like today and the one next week? Yeah. I just want you to know our health committee that is made up of a number of people within our church actually is planning the plan today, has the next one next week with Dr. Youngberg. There'll be more of those, and some of the people with, we have a lot of talented people even within our own ranks right here. I mean, we can be very proud to say that the medical director and the major dietitian for the NEWSTART program are Fallbrook people. All right? We can be very proud of that. But there are others, Dr. Mario, in your program, we're going to want to make sure that you get a chance to be up at sometime, talk about what you're doing, and others that we have in our own congregation. Now, I also want to just say that I know Andrew and Eileen, and I can say that because they're good friends, Dr. Kuninobu and Andrew, okay, I'll be formal. They would probably be happy to talk with any of you. If there's some of you that may have said in your mind, hey, I'm in a state where I think that going up to Weimar would be very valuable to go through the NEWSTART program. I know they'd be happy to talk with you, make sure that you have a website or information that you might need. Okay, there's brochures in the back. Okay, so they're up here. Okay, do we have someone that's going to take care of doing that? Okay, we'll get brochures coming out to you, but after we have prayer. But I just wanted to make sure that you have opportunity, if you'd like to speak with them, They will have a few minutes up here in the front if you want to come and talk with them about any other questions or things about New Start. But we're very proud that you are there, and we're happy that it's succeeding. Karen and I have had opportunity to be up there several times, and every time we manage to either get together with the Kuninobus, they always are gracious and have us over to their house for a quick little supper. Even though they don't eat supper so much, they'll do one for us. Light. Anyway, we enjoy that and we're grateful. So I just want to invite you to stand up. We need a little bit of movement in our systems, and we're going to close with prayer. Holy Father in heaven, thank you for these bodies that you've given to us, and thank you for helping us to understand how to take care of them. And I pray that in the times we're living in, where it's a rat race all around us, where there's things happening and we don't necessarily have the natural education, although we may have a sense, I just pray that you would help us to grab these principles that are in Scripture, that are rock solid, have been built on generations of study and practice. Help us to make them part of our own lives so we may honor and glorify your name in our lives. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thank you all. Karen's handing out brochures, and you're welcome to come